Good morning. The House will come to order. All those in the chambers, please rise, and we'll begin our day with a prayer today by Monsignor Kerwicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let us bow our heads and pray. O ancient God, whose strength supports us in our labor and whose spirit sustains us in our work, give us a new and fresh realization of your presence as we wait upon you in prayer here in the people's house. Give us patience when we demand too much too soon and decisions do not go our way. Courage in the face of apparent defeat when we may still believe the ultimate victory. And betterment of all and love when we falter in fear and fail in faithfulness, that we may have the steady assurance that like a great chief, you are always with us, strengthening us for every super endeavor by pouring upon us a bowl of blessings. And the House says, Amen.
That was good.
I thought you'd like that.
Please remain standing and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I can't be too obvious about it.
Oh, I don't know. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the approval of the House Journal for the 20th day, Wednesday, February 8th, 2023.
The gentleman from Jackson has moved for the approval for the House Journal for the 20th day, Wednesday, February the 8th, 2023. Are there any additions or subtractions to the journal? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the journal will signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You've approved the journal. Gentleman from Jackson.
Mr. Speaker, next order of business will be introduction of special guests.
Introduction of special guests. Lady from St. Charles County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have someone to present.
Please proceed.
To my left and your right, between the third and fourth column, I have a very important guest.
Lady, let me get some order. Please proceed.
I have the father of Marine Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz. He's our Missourian that was one of the 13 that died in Kabul. He was here testifying for Memorial Bridge and making sure that we never forget his son's name. And I just want to give him a round of applause for being here today.
Lady from St. Louis County, Applebaum District.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To introduce a special guest.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to your right, or to your left and to my right, between the fifth and sixth column, is Liz Kelly. She is a intern for Representative Clemens and myself. She is a junior political science major at MIZ. Thank you. Her interest in this internship came from her passion for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and prison reform. She's extremely excited and grateful for the opportunity to learn more with this hands-on experience. Please welcome her to the Capitol.
Welcome to the Capitol. Lady from Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recognition of a special guest.
Please proceed.
Out of all my years of being here at the Capitol, my son has never been here, and I've never recognized him on the House floor. So since he graduated in December from SBU, he has more free time. So he currently has his own business in real estate, and he also turned 22 last Monday. So I would like the House to recognize my son and welcome him to the House floor.
Welcome to the House floor. Further introductions? Seeing none. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next order of business will be points of personal privilege, and I ask you to recognize the lady from Jackson, District 26, for a point of personal privilege.
Lady from Jackson, District 26. Points of personal privilege. Any other point of personal privilege? Seeing none. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next order of business will be first reading of House bills and joint resolutions.
Mr. Clerk, would you please read the House bills and House joint resolutions?
House Bill number 1110, introduced by Weber, an act relating to reproductive health care services. House Bill number 1111, introduced by Weber, an act relating to the Respect People's Abortion Decisions Act. And House Bill number 1112, introduced by Weber, an act relating to abortion with penalty provisions.
Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next order of business will be reports from committee.
Mr. Clerk, would you please read the reports from committee?
Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Physical Review, to which was referred House Committee Substitute House Bill 301, begs leave to report, has examined the same, and recommends that it do pass.
Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next order of business will be House bills for perfection, and I ask you to recognize the gentleman from Jasper for a motion on House Committee Substitute for House Bill 14.
Gentleman from Jackson. Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Committee Substitute for House Bill 14 be perfected and printed.
The gentleman from Jasper has moved that House Bill 14 be perfected and printed. Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Committee Substitute for House Bill 14 be adopted.
The gentleman from Jasper has moved for the adoption of the title, for the adoption of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14. Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the title for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 14 be agreed to.
The gentleman from Jasper has moved for the adoption of the title for House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the title, the House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14, please signify by saying aye. And those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You've agreed to the title. Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 14 is the early supplemental budget request that we got from the governor. And in the bill, we have the 8.7% pay increase for the state workforce. We have some money for school safety grants and some spending authority for SEMA, which is our statewide emergency management agency. Additionally, we have some money for black vulture mitigation that's being appropriated to the Department of Agriculture. And then we have some language fixes from last year's House Bill 20, which had to do with geographic descriptions of particular projects that were appropriated for. There were some mistakes made in that language. We're going back and cleaning that up with this bill to give new appropriation authority to go ahead and get those projects out. So that, Mr. Speaker, is the long and short of it. It's pretty straightforward. Again, mostly the pay plan, those school safety grants, the black vulture mitigation. We are making some increases to the House and Senate contingency funds that will enable us to have access to some more resources for member expenses accounts, some additional staffing, and so on and so forth. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment ending in 01H. It's been distributed, and I move for its adoption.
The gentleman from Jasper has moved for the adoption of House Amendment 1 to House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14. Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a decreasing amendment for 75. It's actually 150,000 in total for the Senate and House contingency funds. We are taking down a little bit of the increase that we made in committee. We had some governor's amendments that were issued here to put these into the bill, and we are right-sizing those appropriations with those dollar amounts. And we are reducing the size of those appropriations with this amendment. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Further discussion, lady from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I inquire of the bill sponsor, please?
This is the gentleman from Jasper. Yield.
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking my inquiry. Good morning. Glad that we're headed home for the weekend. It's been a pretty strenuous week, I'm sure, for you as well.
Yes, I am glad to be headed home too, lady.
Yes. So I wanted to just clarify what is going on with the House Contingency Fund. Can you be a little more specific about, is it new? Is this a new addition to the budget, and some examples of what the purposes would be for it?
Yes. So we made some increases in committee to the House contingent and Senate contingency funds. Those were to build in some extra days for special session. As you recall, earlier this fiscal year, we had a lengthy special session over the summer, and we depleted some of the resources that we set aside for that possibility. We are adding some money back in for, heaven forbid, any future special sessions from the end of this legislative session to the end of the fiscal year. And additionally, we had put in some money for some additional staff and some additional money for member expense accounts. We had, as you know, since we've been here, those have been known as the 700 account.
Yes.
Meaning that those, allotted $700 per member per month. And it's my understanding that that's been the case for 10 years, more than 10 years now, $700 for those member expense accounts. So this would enable us to raise that to $750 per month, so not a huge increase. But our accounts chairman here in the House has done a lot of work to look at that, to find savings within the House Contingency Fund, and they are paying for most of that with savings that we have from the dual LA program and things like that. But then we have an additional need after those savings, and so we're coming back in, topping that off, able to raise that to $750 per month. So yeah.
So some of this is due to some kind of provisions that we have put in place to streamline our services with the LAs. Some of this is extra GR, and the purpose is to, we will be increasing the amount we will see an increase in our 700 accounts that will no longer be 700 accounts, it sounds like.
Yeah. If the legislation passes, of course, through the House and the Senate, it would give us appropriation authority enough to make that increase.
Do you know what the increase would be?
Yeah, it's $50 per month, so it's not a
So it would be the 750
increase, just
account.
a small, 750 account for the next decade, probably be known as the 750 account.
Okay, and then also it would be used to fund prospective but not yet planned special sessions coming.
That's right.
For this session. For
this fiscal year.
Fiscal year.
So we always build in some room in the contingency fund for a possible special session. And we've depleted a lot of those resources with this last special session.
Do you know how much a special session is?
I don't, off the top of my head, lady.
Clear.
I can find that for you.
How much we're setting aside for special sessions? Is there a number for that?
Yeah, in this bill, it's about $100,000. So the majority of those increases are for the special session contingency.
Okay. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions and to take the time to understand what's actually going on so that you can explain it. And I do appreciate the work that you did and for taking my inquiry.
Thank you, lady.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussions on House Amendment 1? Seeing none, gentleman from Jasper, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I close.
The gentleman from Jasper has renewed his motion for the adoption of House Amendment 1 to House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. You've adopted House Amendment 1. Further discussion on House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14 as amended. Lady from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak on the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As many of us know in this body, we have grossly underfunded government workers and people who work in the homes providing for our people with disabilities of various natures, whether it's physical, developmental disabilities. So we are in the game of playing catch-up right now. We have done decently the last couple of years, but we have still only barely gotten up onto the bottom of the rung for what we're paying these people compared to the states around us and the states, of course, the nation. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment. It ends in point 02H. It has been distributed, and I move for its adoption.
Further discussion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what this amendment does is it takes some of the money that is in some of our reserve funds. So you'll hear me speak a lot this next couple of months about fund balances that we have. You can find them on the Missouri Treasurer's website under Open Government. We have probably 350, 400 funds right now that at the end of January we had 16.2 billion, I think it is, 16.4 billion, somewhere in that category. So we have a substantial amount of money that has come to this state through the pandemic, and I think it's time we can start using that money very appropriately to help increase salaries. What this amendment does is it takes some money that is extra in this fund. It's a mental health fund, and it puts money onto the lines to increase salaries for those people who work in home and community-based services, for those people who work in the direct service providers, and for people who do community direct services, CDS. And so we are chipping down a little bit at what this fund balances is. Every time we spend money on these lines, there is a federal drawdown. So for $5,000 for the Department of Health and Senior Services, for consumer-directed personal care, pardon me, I mispronounced that earlier, consumer-directed care, we pulled down another $9.6 federal dollars, so we could add $14 million to these providers between now and the end of this fiscal year. And then you can see $10 million for the home and community-based services, brings down another 19, and that 29 million, we were already taking 19 from that fund for the developmentally disabled community. This would add 10 million. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to take any questions.
Further questions on House Amendment 2? Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To speak against the amendment.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the work that the lady has done on this amendment, and she has spent a lot of time reviewing fund balances, and we've had many discussions about some of these dollars that are rattling around inside of large federal fund balances and the commingling of those funds and the lack of transparency around what money is in these accounts, these funds, and what money could be spent for good things like raising rates potentially for those that we take care of as a state, and those that are very vulnerable and that we care for with our various services. I appreciate that. However, the way that this is proposed, I cannot support making increases to ongoing programs with one-time funds without a plan to come back and pay for that in an ongoing way. I think is not the right way to approach this problem. I think we need to have these conversations leading into the next budget cycle. And even if we do take some of these dollars and pay for those rates in the short term, we need to be aware and agree that we will come back with ongoing revenue to support those increases year after year, so we don't have to pull that support back at any time. We want to try to do it cautiously, make sure that we are prepared to make those increases. And the lady and I have discussed that. We discussed that in committee. And again, I really respect the work that she has put into this, but I'm just not able to support the way that it's proposed at this time. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I will remind the body, this is one of two supplemental budget requests, and we are in the middle of the budget process now for the next year. And again, I just don't think it's the right place or time or methodology, and I would not support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion on House Amendment 2. Lady from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to inquire of the amendment sponsor, please.
Does the lady from St. Louis County yield?
I do. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, lady, for taking my inquiry. I've been here now. I'm in my senior term, and I've spent the lion's share of my term in here with you. I'm really glad to see you back.
Thank you.
And my experience, I remember when I first heard you talking about these fund balances. You have been talking about them for a long time, and I think in many ways alerted a lot of us to the fact that we are holding money over onto the side. Can you, and we hear every time the same argument back, that we shouldn't be using these funds for ongoing expenses because they are intended, because there's no guarantee that they will continue to be funded. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I do, and these fund balances are challenges. As I said, we have about, let's even say 350, which I think is a low estimate right now. And every time I attempt to look at fund balances, there's an appropriate phrase. I'm seeing it in a snapshot of a moment. So today, end of January, the fund I'm looking at has $143 million in it. And you can say, okay, but some of that money has already been appropriated in other places in the budget. One of the things that I learned to do was to ask for a graft of that fund. And so it's more than a snapshot in time. It truly can tell me how much money is in that fund over the last 2, 3, 4 years. So at this moment, this fund has accelerated in how much money it has.
Do you know, excuse me, but do you know where those funds come from to go into the fund?
In this fund, we have a lot of federal dollars, so almost every fund has a flow of money into it and a flow of money out of it on a yearly basis. And then there are Form 9s that are available to everybody in this body that is a accounting reckoning of that money that comes in and goes out. I did have the opportunity, the Department of Mental Health gave us a list of obligations from that money that is $85 million. So if it has 143 today and we know there are future obligations for this money of 85, that's a clue that I look at that maybe we can streamline some of that money from this fund. So it is challenging, and I call them tripwires and hazards to get money out. You're always going to have somebody tell me why money in this fund isn't appropriate to use somewhere else. But I think as a body, it is appropriate for us to look at how much we have, why it's there, the balances we carry, and how we might be able to shake some of that loose to be able to help the people of Missouri.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is that there is a steady stream that comes in.
Yes.
So there will be money coming into this fund from the federal government over time.
Right.
We can depend on that.
Yes.
And there will be some funds coming in from GR as well as matching funds?
Some funds, yes. Some funds it's matching. Some funds it's matching. One of the funds that's large right now has the enhanced FMAP.
Do you know if that's the case in the funds that you're
These
tapping?
Are federal dollars right now.
They're all federal dollars. But we can count on the fact that they will be coming in.
Yes.
Regularly over the years. So that's not really adequate argument that we can't count on those funds being funded.
Well, to the budget chair's point, this is still dollars that are specifically designed. So today it has, what did I just say, $60 million, $50 million in addition to what their yearly expenses are. I'm not sure that we would be able to know that it's always going to have $50 million more.
Okay.
So the point towards needing to continue to fund this with general revenue is a point that we need to consider. I just have seen what I call resting balances. So somebody says there's $50,000 in that fund, but we have $50,000 that we use every year. But when you look at what I call their resting balance, they have $200 million in it. So their paperwork lines up to their $50,000 that they say they need. But if you really look at what's in the bank account for the last years, they have an awful lot more money that's in those funds. And that's something I think as a body we really can and should look at, especially at this moment where we have so much that there's a lot of work that needs to be done for this.
This is a piece, a part of a solution.
Yes.
We also need to find other solutions to couple along with that.
Yes.
Okay. Lady, thank you for the inquiry. I really appreciate it. I've
Thank
learned
you.
a lot from you over the years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from St. Louis County from a microphone other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To inquire of the budget chair.
Does the budget chair from Jasper yield?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning, lady.
I think this is our first inquiry this year.
It is, yeah.
So this amendment, as I understand it, it would give pay raises to people who take care of our most challenged citizens. Is that correct?
Yes, broadly speaking, it's for all state employees, and then there is a $2 per hour shift differential for those that work like the nights and weekend shifts that are less desirable. We have harder time filling those just like we would in the private sector.
I understand. So is that what this amendment does?
No, the ladies' amendment would use so in the underlying bill is that money for statewide workers.
Correct. And I support that.
The ladies' amendment would take money from a federal fund and apply that towards provider rates for a couple of different categories to increase the reimbursement rates that we pay for respective services.
And those individuals are not state employees, I understand.
Yes.
Yes, they are, or no, they are
No,
not?
that is correct. They are not state employees.
Okay, so they do not get the pay raise that is in the current budget. This is...
I'm sorry, lady. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry. Is this better?
That is. Thank you.
Okay. Is this... so this money does not go to the same people that get the pay raise that's in the underlying budget, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we've got state employees that are being appropriated for in the underlying bill, and this would allow providers, theoretically, to increase their pay for their employees, which are private employees.
Is this a different type of work that's being done?
It's comparable, I think, in many ways, to some of the state jobs that we have.
So state workers take care of some of our most challenged citizens, and these contract workers also take care of our most challenged citizens. And the budget gives the state workers a pay raise, and the amendment gives the contract workers a pay raise. So can you explain your objection to this amendment?
Yeah, as I've already stated, there are a couple objections, but I will kind of address the question I think that you're posing. Mm-hmm. Why are we increasing pay for state workers and not for these private employees potentially? Which, by the way, I will point out that is not expressly stated in the ladies' amendment, right? We are raising provider rates, so those provider rate reimbursements would go to those providers, and they, downstream of that process, would determine how much their employees make, along with paying all of their other costs associated with running their businesses. So it's not quite apples to apples, but I see the point you're making. I will remind you that in the FY23 budget, we did a lot of rate increases for these folks specifically, for those providers of our most vulnerable citizens. We did nursing home rate rebasing, we did DD rate stabilization, we've done increases to CDS, we've done, I think, without going through these line by line, I think we've increased these rates over the last couple years. Is there room for more, and is inflation rampant and a real problem for everybody? I think that's a discussion that we should continue. However, my objection to this bill at this time is that we are taking one-time money that will not be continuous necessarily for this purpose, and applying it towards those provider rates that we know will be ongoing need. And so we should generally do that with general revenue, and we should make that commitment as best we can to sustain those increases over the course of time. And so what the lady is proposing here is that we pull out some one-time money, make those rate increases, which would necessitate a second conversation later in the process that would determine whether or not we should go back and pay for them with state revenues that would be more sustainable. I think that it's kind of cart before the horse.
Yeah, I want to take
also,
that two parts. First
one
of
last,
all,
one last
okay.
other thought is that, again, this is a supplemental budget request. We are now, what is this, week 5 into the session, week 6. We are in the middle of the budget process, and we are talking about all of these rates as a body, and as the budget committee, the subcommittees, we're all discussing these things, and it takes a little time, and we need to be careful about these increases that we make, especially on the heels of having made big increases over the last couple of years. So,
okay, so there's 3 points that I want to address that you just
yes.
made. First of all, you're talking about how in the 23 budget we did raise the pay of these workers. I do appreciate that. I think it's necessary. We also raised state pay in the 23 budget, didn't we?
We did.
So was that a comparable raise?
I believe it is,
Okay. And then the
with
second point
say the
is
DD rate, the DD providers, I think it is a comparable as an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second point is that these are one-time funds. Now, we just heard a discussion about how these are federal funds that do come in every year, and we can count on. This is from a federal fund balance. So can you explain how these are one-time funds instead of
Yes, so these are oftentimes, and part of the issue that we have with some of these fund balances is that there are many different types of funds that feed into the fund. So you can't say it's X type or Y type or Z type necessarily, because it's some combination of all those things. And oftentimes that's federal reimbursement or federal grants that we get to those funds, and they all get kind of jumbled around, and then we would spend them on this particular, in this case, rate increases for these providers. So we don't know exactly where these dollars are coming from at this time, so we cannot know if they will be continuous. And if they are continuous, they are almost certainly for a different purpose, for some other program that is federally funded. And so because there's a balance that has grown over time, the lady has rightly identified that there is some room here, some money that is coming in that is not going out, and the balance keeps growing. But the original purpose of those federal funds was never to provide rate increases to these providers. And so they're not intended to do this. We don't know that they're coming back, and we don't know exactly what they are, so we cannot know that they would be sustainable.
And then, so are you saying that you're not committed to continuing these pay raises if we were to give them?
Well, lady, I want to point out to you again, we're talking about rate increases for oftentimes, I think always private entities. And what they do with this money is their decision to make. So you cannot draw a straight line between pay increases and rate increases.
So
however, I think to ask your question, and I don't mean to cut you off, but to ask your question in a way that within that definition, am I committed to these provider rate increases? Not at this time. I think we need to discuss it. I have not been able to spend enough time personally doing my due diligence to understand the lay of the land here. Another thing to consider is that there are hospital provider rates, nursing home provider rates, developmental disability provider rates, and the list goes on and on. And so we need to understand the whole picture and not necessarily the ones that are only considered in this amendment. And I'm at
Understand
work on that
And-
every day.
Okay, so can I ask for your commitment then to work to raise the pay for these contract workers that do similar work to the state employees?
I am committed to considering that.
You're committed to considering raising the pay for contract workers. Well, we pay for.
I am
we do
committed to
raise the pays for
considering
people who-
raising these provider rates.
Okay, I hope you will raise these provider rates. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you,
Chair,
lady.
may I inquire of the lady from St. Louis County?
Does the St. Louis lady from St. Louis County,
I
Baltimore
yield.
District? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, lady.
Good morning.
I understand you wanted to say something?
Well, I was just listening in, and what's interesting is, I understand where the gentleman from Jackson is coming from. These supposed one-time funds, they're kind of a Band-Aid to an overarching problem, right? Well, I would argue it's more of a tourniquet. Yes, it's a temporary money, but we're hemorrhaging. I hear from people all over this state, because as you and I have somewhat become the unofficial spokespeople for persons with disabilities. I think that's fair to say. And it's a title I gladly own. But that means that I hear from the people struggling the most of how are they going to take care of their kids? How are they going to take care of their family members from everyone's district? Everyone has my phone number, and they all say, what can we do to get the rate increased? What can we do? I need help. I need respite care. I cannot take care of my brother 24/7. He needs help. I need help. People are shouting at us for some level of assistance, and we are losing people in droves because why would you take care of another adult who you have to bathe and toilet when you can go to Starbucks and get a 401k, higher pay, and not have a 24-hour schedule? I mean, we cannot compete. So what I'm asking for, and what I want people to understand, is that I'm hearing from all of your districts. No one's listening, but that's okay. I am hearing from all of your districts that people need help. And yeah, we're hemorrhaging. We are losing people. We do not have enough support staff. So while this may be a temporary fix is better than nothing. And the famous saying, let's not let perfect get in the way of good. This will at least buy us some time, if nothing else, to solve the problem, because we need it. I mean, I've been here, this is my third year, and I've been having this same argument, and we've been kicking the can down the road for I don't know how long, and every year the gentleman from Jackson assures me we're going to take care of this problem, and we haven't yet. How long are we going to do this?
Thank you, lady. So I want to understand, you're saying that people who are paid to help, initially they're strangers, but I think they get closer relationships, but
Absolutely.
they're certainly not
They
family.
become family.
And help people bathe and go to the toilet. Those people are leaving those jobs to help people go to the toilet in order to go make lattes for people.
Well, they're getting paid substantially more. I mean, why would you?
Yeah.
I'd take that deal.
Yeah, so they get paid more to make lattes than they do to help people, to help our most struggling citizens.
Correct. And I am hearing, I can probably name someone in every single district who has called or emailed my office asking for help. So,
And this amendment would make a step toward helping the people who help people go to the toilet.
correct. I mean, I appreciate the lady's amendment, but it's still nowhere near far enough. I mean, it's a tiny step forward. It's still nowhere near enough. And so the fact that we are begging for crumbs for a third year in a row is infuriating. And I just don't understand when are we going to actually do something rather than promising to consider maybe sometime in the future.
Yeah, and I totally agree. We absolutely need to commit to protecting these people, to giving them what they need to survive. But I want to address something else the bill sponsor said, and that is that these go towards private agencies who pay the employees. Are these for-profit agencies, do you know?
Generally, no. No, they are not for-profit agencies. They are 501(c)(3)s for the most part. They,
They get who they can. They don't have a ton of resources. They don't keep the money they left out. They spend every dollar that they get going back into their services.
Right. And these are agencies like Easter Seals, is that correct?
Correct.
And I understand
Seals,
Easter Seals has to do a lot of fundraising just to keep up with our expenses, right?
Correct. I've been invited to everything from auctions to trivia nights to 5Ks to all kinds of things. They're constantly fundraising because of the constant need.
There is a constant need. They're constantly fundraising. This would not fill their fundraising need, right?
Not at all. Like I said, we're begging for crumbs at this point, and we're still repeatedly being told that maybe next year's budget we can finagle something, but certainly not this year. No way, no how.
Okay. Thank you, lady.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion on House Amendment 2. Gentleman from McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to inquire the gentleman from Jasper, if I could.
Does the gentleman from Jasper yield? Budget Chair District.
Yes.
Please proceed.
Thank you.
Hi, gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen.
We've never been this close before. We can almost talk without a microphone, but
yeah,
then no one else would hear us, so we wouldn't want that. I wanted to, something that was said that I want to clarify, and if I understood it correctly, it was said that we raised state worker pay in FY23. But that's not true, or at least that's not the whole story, because we just continued the increases for state worker pay that we included in the early supplemental for FY22 at this time last year. Is that correct?
Yep, that's a good point.
Okay, and is it also true to say, would it also be true to say, that in the early supplemental this time last year for FY22, in which we included an increase to state worker pay, we did not include any provider rate increases?
That's correct.
Which is what's being suggested right now. Now, is it also true that we've, over the last 2-3 years, included hundreds of millions of dollars for these provider rates?
That is absolutely true.
Bringing them up to $15 in excess of that. I just this weekend was looking at some of our DD provider job postings, $17, $18 an hour. It's my understanding at the Department of Mental Health we have some of our direct care workers making as little as, say, $15 an hour. Do you believe that to be true?
I do.
So 8.7% on $15 an hour, that's $16.30. Does that sound roughly?
It does.
Correct. And so we're not foreclosed the thought of potentially talking about provider rate increases as we work through the normal budget process. And in fact, that has been normative and traditionally what we've done. Is that fair to say?
Also correct. Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure I had it right, and I think I do. Thank you for the inquiry, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion on House Amendment 2. Lady from St. Louis County, Lavender District.
Mr. Speaker, if there's nothing else, I'll plan on the last thing for this amendment.
You are
Yes?
recognized to close.
Thank you. So there are long-term effects of what's happening inside of our lack of spending for our people who are developmentally disabled, physically disabled, that are still living in their homes. One of the facts that came to us from Department of Mental Health is we have people sitting in jail because we don't have placements for them in mental institutions, whether it's a home or whether it's a facility. So we have people sitting and suffering without this. I think the challenge that we all have this year inside of our budget is to figure out how to shake loose billions of dollars that are in these funds and in our budget, and yet still use general revenue in a way that's rational. The tax cut that we made, you all made in September, puts limitations on our revenue growth for the next decade. Because every time we make a little bit more money as a state, we trigger another tax cut. So our revenues are going to be boxed in for the next decade. So I'm mindful of the chair's point of view that we need to be careful of what we're doing in spending our general revenue dollars because we're boxed in for the next decade. But we've got, I'm going to tell you, $11 billion more than what is a normal amount that the state has for prior to the pandemic. So I do think that's a challenge for us to be creative and figure out how we go about using these funds to meet the needs of Missouri without crippling our budget going forward. I appreciate the budget chair's position. It is a familiar song. This is short term, this isn't long term, it's a point in time for what's in those funds. I think as a body we need to grab some certainty on these very challenging fund balances to look at and see how we can use that. With that, I appreciate the conversation and I close.
The lady from St. Louis County has renewed her motion for the adoption of House Amendment 2 to House Committee Substitute House Bill 14. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. And those opposed, no. And the noes have it. You failed to adopt House Amendment 2. Further discussion on House Committee Substitute House Bill 14 as amended. Lady from Boone. Green.
Thank you. To speak in support of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, as the Budget Committee, have worked really hard on getting this emergency supplemental moving. We know that all of our departments throughout the state are hemorrhaging employees, and we need to do something about it immediately. We did have some really positive conversations in this markup talking about maybe looking into the rest of the fiscal year 2024 budget and increasing some of these pay raises to an even larger amount, which is something you'll hear a lot of my side of the aisle talk about moving forward, especially as it relates to some of the areas that are tasked with providing care to those in the custody of the state. I know one of my colleagues had a very heartfelt story, and if I could, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to inquire of the lady from Clay, Nuremberg District.
Does the lady from Clay yield?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lady, in budget, we had a lot of conversations about some of the areas of our state that are struggling the most. And I know you shared a story that touched your district about the life of a child that was lost here in Missouri, in part because of the lack of resources that we have propping up and supporting our state workers. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to share that with the body.
Well, thank you, lady. When we look at our state budget, behind all those numbers, behind the pages of House Bill 14, what I see are the people we are serving. When we talk about the 8.7% pay increase, across the board, every single department said that we greatly need this. But we have been sounding the alarm for years that we are not doing enough to protect the most vulnerable. When I picked up the paper this weekend, I opened it to a story that was one of the most heart-wrenching things that I've seen. It was the story of two twins, not even 5 years old, who had been in state care. They were returned to their birth mom, and here a few years later, one of those twins was carried out dead, and her twin sister was starving. She was unresponsive. Paramedics carried her out wearing a diaper. Little Ivy House. Ivy House was the name of one of the little girls that died. Her sister, A.H., as she's being referred to, is hopefully recovering and doing better now, and hopefully in the care of the state. But when I look at that story, I can't help but think as a mom, we want nothing more than our kids to be safe and protected. And unfortunately, sometimes that is the very people who should be protecting him. But unfortunately, little Ivy House's mother had severe issues. She had a very severe mental health condition. And our state keeps chopping away at all of these services. We're not investing in our workers. The folks at Children's Division we are putting them in situations that, quite frankly, are untenable. Every year we ask more of them. We give them more cases they cannot even begin to keep up on and check in on all the kids that they need to be checking in on, building those relationships that are so key. We keep putting more on them, and it's so alarming when we say, we know that there are kids in this state, right now that are starving. There are kids in this state right now that are sometimes hidden in plain sight. And they are crying out for help. They are crying out for those children's division workers to come visit them and be their lifeline. Lady, last year we spent $30 million. One-time appropriation, we love to hear. Just a one-time appropriation. Those we're okay with, right? But we are not investing in our state workers who are caring for our most vulnerable. Last year we were okay, and I often poke fun at this, but $30 million for a new arena at the state fair, we're okay with that, but not a $30 million investment to really change children's division and make sure that they can keep up with their caseloads.
Yeah, lady, I would like to go down that path with you for a moment. Caseloads is something we've had a lot of conversations about, especially as it relates to children's division. And my understanding is, to be in compliance with our accreditation, those caseloads should be 1 to 15. And we're seeing caseworkers across the state with ratios of 1 to 50, 1 to 60. I know namely in the Kansas City and St. Louis area, but just wanted to highlight that. I know it's something we've talked a lot about.
And we were just talking about kids, so thank you for asking that story. I think what speaks to the heart of all of us is making sure we're taking care of our kids. But Veterans Commission, Department of Corrections, putting correction officers in a situation where our prisons are staffed, some of them at 40%, and forcing them to work nights and weekends and being away from their young families. Department of Mental Health, DSS Youth Services, over and over again, I'm asking, I should say, talk with your state workers. All of us, all 163 of us, we have state workers in our district. Ask them what they are experiencing in their jobs today. Why are people leaving? What can we do to make sure that we're improving state services? In the long run, oftentimes saving the state money. Lady, my question is, when we're sitting on a record surplus and failing to invest in our people, when will we do it? If not now, when?
Thank you, lady. I appreciate that. Again, I want to go on record, and I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting this bill. Like I said, the 8.7 pay raise is a great place to start, and our state employees desperately need it. But I do look forward to considering the conversations with the budget chair moving forward so we can make sure we're investing in those areas that we know lives are on the line if we don't. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion on House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14 as amended. Seeing none, gentleman from Jasper, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I close.
The gentleman from Jasper has renewed his motion for the adoption of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14 as amended. All those in favor will signify by saying aye, and those opposed no. And the ayes have it. You've adopted House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14 as amended. Gentleman from Jasper, you're recognized to renew your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
The gentleman from Jasper has renewed his motion for the perfection and printing of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 14 as amended. All those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everybody voted? Has everybody voted? Has everybody voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 148 yea, 2 nay, you have moved for perfection in printing House Committee Substitute House Bill 14 as amended. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask you to recognize the gentleman from Jackson for a quick introduction of special guest.
Gentleman from Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd love to introduce some special guests from Blue Springs Chamber of Commerce, the leadership class led by Carmen Booker, Lisa, back behind us in the upper gallery, Carmen Booker, Lisa Lacombe, Andy Mayfield, Brett Lyon, Ethan Fullerton, Hannah Smith, Jennifer Gaiman, Jeremy Rowan, Joshua Elsey, Melissa Braun, Mike Lehman, Nathan Manley, Nick Brooks, Raymond Brown, Rose Hall, Tara Lavelle, and Tyler Fleming. These are all fine leaders in the Blue Springs area. I'd like the House to recognize them.
Welcome to the House. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, next order of business will be House bills for third reading. I ask you to recognize the lady from Buchanan for a motion on House Committee Substitute for House Bill 115.
Lady from Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Committee Substitute for House Bill 115 be third read and passed.
The lady from Buchanan has moved for the third reading and passage of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 115. Lady from Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you remember yesterday, House Bill 115 has to do with direct access for physical therapists. There is no reason that Missouri is the most restrictive state in the nation. It's time that we allow our patients to be able to choose their health care path. I think that we all want to pass. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I close.
Further discussion. Gentleman from Jackson.
To speak in favor of the bill, Mr.
Please
Speaker.
proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The lady from Buchanan has made it very clear. We have worked on this bill over several sessions. We have passed it out of the House several times. It just doesn't make it to the finish line. It's a good bill. I'm going to support it. I'm going to ask the body to support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Lady from St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I say the same thing as all these. I appreciate the opportunity to work to most of the scope of my practice, of my license. I appreciate the opportunity. I no longer need to lose money because I have to pass those people to physicians who then don't go or go to a chiropractor for their care. So I appreciate the work of the lady, and then Robert Ross, who was here for a couple of years, who championed this bill for quite a while as well. And I know we have people across this building that have worked on this for years. And I'm happy to see that we're doing what we're doing at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. Seeing none, lady from Buchanan, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
The lady from Buchanan has renewed her motion for the third reading and passage of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 115. All those in favor will vote yes. Those opposed, no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everybody voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 147 yea and 1 nay, you have third read and passed House Committee Substitute to House Bill 115. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Staying on that same order of business, I ask you to recognize the gentleman from Jasper for a motion on House Committee Substitute for House Bill 301.
Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Committee Substitute for House Bill 301 be third read and passed.
The gentleman from Jasper has moved for the third reading and passage of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 301. Gentleman from Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill that deals with the special prosecutor for the communities who have threshold crime that exceeds 35 cases per 100,000 population. This affects all communities, but particular at this moment, it does affect the city of St. Louis. We have heard a lot of discussion about this homicide rate is somehow consistent for decades. And while that may be true, and we can argue about the ratio of homicides to population, one thing, however, is much different today than it was decades ago, and that is that the problems associated with the city of St. Louis are spilling beyond their borders and starting to affect the rest of the state. The Missouri Chamber of Commerce has come out and boldly said that crime is the biggest issue for them, and more than 500 businesses around the state that do not do business in St. Louis have signed on to their declaration that it's affecting the entire state. So in addition to the economic effects on our state, I cannot accept the idea that we're allowing 200 Missourians a year to die, and the people who are committing those offenses are not in jail. This bill provides for a special prosecutor to have sole and exclusive jurisdiction over cases involving firearms that are first and second degree murder, first and second degree assault, first and second degree robbery, and vehicle hijacking. In addition, this bill allows for services to inmates. It allows the department to assist them and to get near their release date for birth certificates, Social Security, identification, and assistance in obtaining their Medicaid assistance. This also allows for non-apportioned vehicles to be able to have back the blue plates. This provides for the Peace Officers Training Tuition Reimbursement Program, which will allow officers who might not otherwise be able to afford the cost of the academy to attend the academy and receive reimbursement for it. It also speaks to school protection officers and other school officials and their ability to carry firearms. And it provides with truth in sentencing and deals with the issue of bail reform. That, Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Further discussion on House Committee Substitute House Bill 301. Gentleman from St. Louis County Meredith.
To speak on the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I found myself last night just angry. I'm angry about this bill. I'm angry about the way the debate went yesterday. But I'm angry about this constant problem we face every year in this place. The bill sponsor here said that this explicitly primarily impacts St. Louis City. My city. City of the people I was elected to represent, and several other members of this body were elected to represent. Take a look at how all of us voted on this bill yesterday. Yesterday I heard the bill sponsor say there were 200 homicides in the city of St. Louis last year, and you want me to do nothing about it? Mr. Speaker, this weekend, about 10 o'clock at night, I'm laying on the couch watching a movie with my girls cuddling with me, and I hear 4 gunshots. And I have to run outside my front door because my neighbor was just shot in his car. A dad that lives a couple doors down from me. I had to go make sure he was okay, and thank God somehow he wasn't killed as a bullet flew through his driver's side window and 3 in his door. I had to show the doorbell cam to the police and sit and talk with them as they got there, and they did a great job. They showed up fast. They were thorough. Mr. Speaker, on October 24th, a young man walked into Central Visual and Performing Arts High School with an AR-15, shot his way in, and started shooting. My niece is a teacher at that school. Had to hunker down in a classroom to try and keep kids in line so they didn't run out the door, stayed quiet, as he tried to go through each door to kill people. A young girl, Alexandria Bell, was killed. A beloved teacher, Jean Kushka, was killed. And by a miracle, no others were killed because the rifle, thankfully, didn't work a bunch of times. And thankfully, a whole bunch of experienced police officers just happened to be right down the street at a funeral that morning. These are a couple examples from my district, and I can guarantee you there are members of this body with districts that have a lot more examples than mine does. So no, we don't want you to do nothing. We don't want you to do nothing about violence in our communities. We want you to listen to us about what we need to do something about violence in our communities. For years, we come here pleading for the things that we need to do something that will actually address violence in our communities. We plead for investments in social services and mental health care so that we don't have wait times of a year to get a bed for mental health treatment, so that we have social workers and mental health workers in our schools, so that we have affordable housing that also doesn't separate families, to do something about mass incarceration so that we're not pulling family members out and are instead getting them treatment when they need help. Resources to address generational trauma and poverty and systemic racism. And we ask you for common sense laws on guns. Now, the first set of that stuff, I realize it's hard, it's complicated, it costs money. It's hard. Well, metro regions like St. Louis pay more per capita into this state in taxes and bring more revenue into this state per capita than anywhere else. And yet we receive less per capita in dollars spent. So we're begging. Fund homelessness initiatives in a real way, right? St. Louis bears the brunt of the cost of homelessness in the region. But no. You come to us today and say the solution is what you always think the solution is, an easier political move of pointing the finger at elected Democrats in the cities and saying it must be their fault. Just like when our schools have been struggling for decades from underinvestment and flight and segregation, you come in and say, well, let's take away the control of an elected school board locally and have it run by a state-appointed school board. That'll fix the problem. Did it? No, our schools are still begging for help. And I've seen more progress in my schools and better communication in my schools in the last few years since the local elected board regained power. You come in passing bills that only apply to St. Louis City to change our educational structure. Has that magically fixed our problem? No. No, it hasn't. Outcomes at charter schools are pretty comparable to outcomes at public schools. No, you keep coming in and saying, you know better than we do. Now, common sense gun laws. Our law enforcement officers tell us every day their lives are in danger, it's hard to do their jobs, and all of our lives are in danger because guns just keep flooding the streets. These aren't hard. A requirement for permits that we used to have less than a decade ago simply made it where police could remove guns from the hands of folks that, by definition, were not law-abiding citizens. A simple way to make sure when they stop a kid with a gun, that kid doesn't have a permit, they take it. And guess what? Guns are expensive and hard to replace, so that reduced the number of guns on the street. It reduces the number of gun suicides, and it reduces the number of homicides. Look around the country. The stats are there. You want to blame Democrats running cities? Then why is it that the murder rate is 42% higher in red states than blue states? It's investments in social services that address the root causes of violence, and it's common sense gun laws. But no, it's politically easier to point the finger. It's politically easier to just say, nah, we're going to take charge, we'll fix it. It's politically easier to say, we'll lock people up for longer, because that's the other thing this bill does. Longer sentences. Yeah, because that's worked in the past, hasn't it? Just lock people up for longer. I'm tired of these tired solutions that don't work. When we are begging and pleading and telling you what will. And Mr. Speaker, I have filed bills this year at the request of the students and teachers at that school, at the request of countless members of my community. Bills like an extreme risk protection order that the state of Florida under Republican Governor Rick Scott and a Republican legislature passed after a high school shooting in their state. And it's not even been referred to a committee for a hearing. You won't even let these kids come out here and tell their stories. You don't want to hear what we have to say because you know what's best, and a state-appointed board and a state-appointed prosecutor, they'll know best. They don't even have to live in our city. I'm sick of it. Now, you do have a couple gun provisions in this bill, don't you? One that snuck in, trying to pretend it wasn't even there, a change to the definition of rifle so that guns manufactured in this state that cause massive damage, like the gun that was taken into the school in my district, can be classified not as a rifle even if they function in exactly the same way as the definition of a rifle. Or we've got a change that allows felons to carry guns. Yeah, that's in this bill. And you all couldn't even find it in you to vote for something a committee in the interim, bipartisan, agreed on, that kids shouldn't be carrying guns down the street.
Gentlemen, your time has expired. Gentleman from St. Louis City, County, Wyndham District, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak on the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm a part of a group chat where young black Democrats from around the country keep each other informed on what's going on around the country, and I check my group chat because I keep it on mute. I do. It just rings too much. But I checked it this morning, and I read an article, and I had to rub my eyes. It was a little early, and I kind of couldn't believe what I was reading. It felt like what I lived through the day prior. So, from Mississippi today, only in Mississippi, white representatives vote to create white-appointed court system for blackest city in America. A white supermajority of the Mississippi House voted after an intense 4-hour-plus debate to create a separate court system, and an expanded police force within the city of Jackson, the blackest city in America, that will be appointed completely by white state officials. If House Bill 1020 becomes law later this session, the white Chief Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court would appoint 2 judges to oversee a new district within the city, one that includes all of the city's majority white neighborhoods, among other areas. The white state attorney general would appoint 4 prosecutors, a court clerk, and 4 public defenders for the new district. The white state public safety commissioner would oversee an expanded Capitol Police Force, run currently by a white chief. The appointments by state officials would occur in lieu of judges and prosecutors being elected by the local residents of Jackson and Hinds County, as is the case in every other municipality and county in the state. Mississippi's capital city is 80% black and home to a higher percentage of black residents than any other major American city. Mississippi's legislature is thoroughly controlled by white Republicans who have redrawn districts.
Gentlemen, please state your point of order.
The gentleman is talking about Mississippi issues, and we were talking about House Bill 301 that's here in Missouri. If he could please stay on topic, I'd appreciate it.
Everybody, please keep their points on topic. Gentlemen, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mississippi's capital city is 80% black and home to a higher percentage of black residents than any other major American city. Mississippi's legislature is thoroughly controlled by white Republicans who have redrawn districts over the past 30 years to ensure that they can pass any bill without a single Democratic vote. Every legislative Republican is white, and most Democrats are black. After thorough and passionate dissent from black members of the House, the bill passed 76-38 Tuesday, primarily along party lines. 2 black members of the House, Rep. Cedric Burnett, a Democrat from Tunica, and Angela Cockerham, an independent from Magnolia, voted for the measure. All but one lawmaker representing the city of Jackson, Rep. Shonda Yates, a white independent, opposed the bill. Only in Mississippi will we have a bill like this, where we say solving the problem requires removing the vote from black people. Rep. Ed Blackman, a Democrat from Kansas, said while pleading his case with colleagues to oppose the measure. For most of the debate, Jackson Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, who has been publicly chided by the white Republicans who lead the legislature, looked down on the House chamber from the gallery. Lumumba accused the legislature earlier this year of practicing plantation politics in terms of its treatment of Jackson. And of the bill that passed Tuesday, he said, "It reminds me of apartheid." Hinds County Circuit Judge Adrian Wooden, who served in the House before being elected judge and would be one of the existing judges to lose jurisdiction under this House proposal, also watched the debate. Public Safety Commissioner.
Gentlemen, please state your point of order.
We're not staying on the topic.
Gentlemen, your last discussion for the couple of minutes has concerned issues outside of the state of Missouri, not concerning the bill at hand. The point of order is well taken. Further discussion on House Committee Substitute to House Bill 301. State your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My point of order is that there was no discussion on the point of order.
Gentlemen, pursuant to Rule 84, I'm the ultimate trier of fact. There doesn't need to be discussion. I took the point of order as well taken. Your time speaking today has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Ultimate Trier of Fact.
Gentleman from Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To comment on the bill.
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I spent the last 28 years of my life in law enforcement. Was assigned to this committee. As we work through these problems, crime in the city of St. Louis is multifaceted. We're not saying this is the only option. This is a option. And we are trying to address it. That's what it comes down to. The citizens of the city of St. Louis, as the gentleman spoke of earlier, as he spoke of earlier, I get it. There's a lot of grandmothers, grandfathers, kids that are running around there that don't enjoy the same safety and protection that most of us do in our communities. And that's one of the things that I think did come across in this piece of legislation. We're trying to do something about that. So I commend the chairman on his bringing this bill forward and attempting to address the problem. And I will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion on House Committee Substitute House Bill 301. Gentleman from Jackson.
Mr. Speaker, I move the previous question.
The gentleman from Jackson has moved that shall the question under immediate consideration be now put. All those in favor will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everybody voted? Has everybody voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 103 yes, 42 nay, you have moved the previous question. Gentleman from Jasper, you have 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crafting a piece of legislation that bridges the aisle has proven to be a very difficult and frustrating thing. What's left is something that I think could make a contribution to solving a problem for everybody. And I would point out that in addition to the comments I've gotten from the economic side of the state, economic interests, I've gotten many, many letters applauding this bill, and without exception, they encourage me, and the majority of them were from the city of St. Louis, people who just live there. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
The gentleman from Jasper has renewed his motion for the third reading and passage of House Committee Substitute to House Bill 301. Would remind the body that there is an emergency clause. All those in favor will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everybody voted? Has everybody voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 109 yea, 35 nay, and 1 present, you have third read and passed House Committee Substitute to House Bill 301. Gentleman from Jasper, you're recognized for the emergency clause.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of the emergency clause to House Committee Substitute for House Bill 301.
Discussion on the emergency clause. Gentleman from Boone. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To inquire.
Please. Does the gentleman from Jasper yield?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm over here. I have some questions regarding the emergency clause.
Sure.
The constitutional requirements state that emergency clauses must be necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, or safety. Can you please explain the emergency clause related to that provision?
It directly affects public health and safety. The homicide rate, the failure to incarcerate the people committing those homicides exists today. It existed yesterday, it will exist tomorrow, and every single day that we don't act.
Thank you. And does the emergency clause apply to the entire bill or just certain provisions?
It applies to predominantly that area regarding the special prosecutor.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Further discussion on the emergency clause. Seeing none, gentleman from Jasper, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
The gentleman from Jasper has renewed his motion for the passage of the emergency clause for House Committee to substitute to House Bill 301. All those in favor will vote yes. Those opposed will vote no. Mr. Clerk, please ring the bell and open the board. Has everybody voted? Has everybody voted? Mr. Clerk, please close the board and tally the vote. By your vote of 108 yes, 38 nay, and 3 present, you have failed to pass the emergency clause. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next order of business will be announcements.
Announcements. Gentleman from McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Announcement.
Please proceed.
Your Committee on Rules Legislative Oversight will meet in 5 minutes in hearing room 4.
Gentleman from Randolph.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, you know, the Honorable Herman Morse from District 151 has not been with us this week because he has been under the weather. He's been in the hospital. He's hoping to get out today and be back with us on the floor Monday. I just hope we'll send our prayers and well wishes to Herman as he is not with us today, but should be back Monday. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentleman from Jasper.
Jasper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Crime Prevention and Public Safety will reconvene at 11 o'clock in House Hearing Room 7.
Thank you. Gentleman from Pulaski.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, from a microphone other than my own.
Please proceed.
Yes, announcement, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Transportation Accountability will have a continuation of our hearing this morning immediately upon adjournment. Thank you.
Gentleman from Polk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Health and Mental Health Policy shall meet Monday at noon in hearing room 6. Hearing room 6. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Green.
Mr. Speaker, your Appropriations Subcommittee on Public Safety, Revenue, and Transportation will begin or continue their hearing in about 30 minutes in room 3.
Lady from Barton.
Mr. Speaker, special announcement.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, whenever I was younger, I always thought a half a century, man, that's old. But now as I get closer and closer to that 50 mark, it's just another year, no big deal, right? Well, today we have a special person from representative from Platte County, or as we say, Pouchet County. It is his 50th, so make sure you tell him happy birthday today.
Happy birthday, gentlemen. Gentleman from Clay.
Announcement, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Your Special Committee on Government Accountability is meeting upon adjournment in House Hearing Room 6. That's a change. It's number 6.
Gentleman from Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Announcement. Your Committee on Rural Community Development will be meeting Monday at noon in a hearing room to be announced. Thank you.
Gentleman from Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Announcement.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Budget Subcommittee on Health, Mental Health, Senior Services will meet Monday at 11 in hearing room 3. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Special Committee on Election Contest will meet in hearing room 5 about 5 minutes after adjournment. Thank you.
Gentleman from Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to announce that next week on Wednesday, the Missouri Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus will be hosting a venison lunch. It'll be venison stew. That's a break from our traditional squirrel gravy breakfast. So next Wednesday at noon.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentleman from St. Charles County.
Now, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your special committee on Homeland Security will meet on Monday in House Hearing Room 5 at noon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further announcements? Seeing none. Oh, gentleman from Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Announcement. The Budget Ag Appropriations Subcommittee will meet upon adjournment on Monday.
Thank you, gentlemen. I was waiting for this one. Gentleman from Jackson. Something happening this weekend?
Make an announcement.
Yes, please.
Just like the body to know that the Chiefs are playing in the Super Bowl on Sunday. Starts at 5:30, and there will be a parade in Kansas City on Wednesday. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Go Chiefs. Gentleman from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Upon return, members should be prepared to third read House Committee Substitute for House Bill 14. And with no other business before the body, I ask that this House stand adjourned until 4 p.m. Monday, February 13th, 2023.
The gentleman from Jackson has moved the House stand adjourned until 4 p.m. Monday, February the 13th, 2023. All those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. And the ayes have it. The House stands adjourned.